to after this.
No, after this I have to watch something. And then when 23rd, Pennsylvania,
23rd now, next week. Okay.
there is where my story is.
So you will
Su tamo tek uspeli dolazi, ostali, tako da, da, ajmo polako.
so you are going to perform this piece. Aha. Aha. I don't know. 23rd, I know there is a big opening of the new Kunsthalle.
Vidi je profesorka najbolje za par minuta vi da krenete da
Maybe it's related. Yeah, yeah, yeah. And then I can imagine where. But I will be there because next week I'm still in Ljubljana. Yeah. Yeah,
I don't have your contact, but if not, I look for you in Instagram.
yeah, you can find. Okay.
Okay. I am very happy that we can continue with our conference that is dealing with the very important topics of today. And this session is basically devoted to the issues of colonialism and decolonialism, migrations, and ecological crisis, global warming, climate change, and the most important responsibility of art and artists in this respect. My name is Milena Dragićević, and I am professor at the University of Arts in Belgrade. I come from the sphere of cultural policy and cultural management, so one of my recent work is also connected to enable voices of Global South to enter the academic cultural sphere and artistic research and artistic education, which is not the case in spite of the fact that we ourselves here in Serbia are part of semi-peripheries of Europe and that we might be considered as one that might come up with different perspectives and different voices. I would also like to remind you that this part of the world, once upon a time, used to be a leader of so-called non-aligned movement, combining forces from today's wording, Global South, to come up in the global sphere to let their voice to be heard. But unfortunately, since 30 to 40 years, this voice of the developing world, of the Global South, is not heard as it used to be in time of 60s and 70s, which has been time of, let's say, culture of hope. We all hoped that that's the end of colonization, that that's the end of global domination, that we are going to help each other to come up to the world stage with the new demands, with the new issues, with the new perspectives, but somehow neocolonialism and the global capitalism is today, I would say, stronger than ever. Even in academic sphere that I'm belonging to, we can speak about academic capitalism, where universities are more and more adapting to so-called needs of the market. I might misuse a little bit this position of a moderator to explain what that really means, especially in this country. We are now under huge pressure of European Union to develop something called dual education, to prepare labor force for small tasks, for human occupations that no one in the global north would really like to work, to be, for example, conductor of Western European trains. So Angela Merkel signed, I mean her government, with our schools for railways, a very nice contract. How we have to readapt our educational process so that our conductors of train can be immediately employed in Western Europe. So very cheap for Europe. Someone else is paying for education here, and those labor force is going to work where it is needed. Not here, we don't have trains. That's going to be debated later on about mobility of artists not using airplanes, but how to use railways if there is none in some areas of the world, even on European semi-peripheries. Of course, there is much more issues that are pressing, which is related to global warming, to the production of CO2, and many other issues that somehow are related to exploitation of global natural resources for the benefits of the few, for the benefits of few economies of the world, and on the expense of the people that lives on those territories. Somehow, finally, we come up, and we are now belonging, this area of the world is belonging to this sphere of exploited resources and exploited territories, and the response of civil society, although strong, is usually not heard or not, I would say, accepted by our politicians, rulers, leaders. There is only one thing I forgot to say at the beginning. For those that would need translation from English to Serbian language, here are the devices that you might use. So feel free to approach and take the translation. Although it seems that we are pretty good in English language. Another thing that I would like to underline is that Belgrade International Theatre Festival, BITEF, for the last 5 years is really putting in focus of its attention through different conferences, workshops, and panel debates, the contextual issues which are much larger than narrow perspective of art, artistic development, artistic production. And this year, time is to be devoted to green agenda, to ecology, and the role of art and artists in helping the, how would say it, society to understand what's going on and how things are developing. Now the time is to present you my panelists, and I will start immediately with Amanda Pinja, whose work of art we could see yesterday in the theater on the hill on Banovo Brdo. She is a Mexican-Chilean Austrian artist, so you can see a very global artist belonging to global world, cultural worker living between Vienna and Mexico City. Her work is concerned with the decolonization of art, focusing on the political and social power of movement. Since 2013, she is a certified Feldenkrais practitioner applying the method to movement research in performance, installation, and video. She finished the international postgraduate studies in curating in the performing arts at the Salzburg University. Since 2008, she leads the gallery space specialized in expanded choreography and performance, Nada Local, in Vienna, which she founded together with the Swiss visual artist Daniel Zimmermann. Karlota Weber studied political sciences in Dresden and Bologna. For the past 5.5 years, she worked with the Green European Foundation, where she, among other things, engaged with the topic of environmental mobility and climate-related migration. we are not yet so conscious about those climate-related migrations that are already, how it's say, tormented not only Polynesia but also Africa and many other regions. She now works as a political advisor and member parties coordinator within the European Green Party. So she's going to bring us here the voice of responsible European politicians, foundations, and agencies that deals with those issues. And finally, Lazaro Gabino Rodrigez was born in Durango, Mexico in 1983. He holds a master's degree in theater from Amsterdam's Hogeschool voor den Kunsten. His work consists in explorations around the fiction and notions of true and false. Emerging from personal memories and their relation to fiction, Lazaro's projects take their final forms as theater pieces, texts, films, and radio productions. In 2003, he founded with Luisa Pardo the collective Lagartias Tiradas al Sol, an artists' collective dedicated to contemporary creation, with which he have developed artistic and pedagogical processes continuously since then. Of course, we invited Lazaro, being very much stimulated with his response letter to Jérôme Bell that we are going probably to have more time later on to discuss, because it really focuses on controversies of views and positions coming from different geographical, political, and social contexts of the global north and the global south. As we had yesterday possibility to see Amanda Pinja performance, and we saw to what extent it really relates to different issues of neocolonialism, capitalist economic policies that are destroying not only nature but resources, especially clean water. And these issues are so, I would say, urgently present in contemporary Serbian public space discussion. I would like to start our conversation with her feelings and her statements and emotions, why, as an artist, choreographer, but also, as you could see, our artists are extremely transdisciplinary, using different media, different tools, not only their bodies, but also technologies and so on in their projects, why she felt this responsibility to address issues which are, I would say, globally crucial from very local and personal and experiential individual position. So please, Amanda.
Thank you very much for inviting me, and thank you very much for being here and for the question. I decided to address the topic of extractivism and mining corporations when it became personal for the community where my mother lives, and somehow that sort of feeling it in my own flesh or my own body, in my own experience, motivate me to do the work that we presented yesterday. Yet I've been always very interested in issues of, and I wanted to refer, because you talked about colonialism, and I often talk about coloniality, which would be related but not coupled with colonialism as a moment in time in which, you know, certain power over another creates a situation of inequality and of exploitation. And I've been working in issues of coloniality in the way that somehow the space of the theater, the space of the museum, the space of university represent a one perspective, which is the colonial perspective somehow, which has a lot of institutionalization. So I was very interested in addressing other forms of understanding nature that were not in that frame of, modern Western concept of nature, which is a very particular concept that somehow becomes very expanded through this process of pedagogies of colonialism, as I call it, of coloniality, right? University, science, right? Western science as the only validator of experience, the only holder of the truth. And in that process, I was wondering, especially in relation to some Mexican indigenous forms of relating to nature and some Andean, Chilean, Peruvian, Bolivian ways of relating to what the West calls nature. I was wondering about this very sort of exotic way of understanding that is present in Western thought, in which we are pre-existent. We are not part of it. Nature is outside, is objectual, is the environment around, but it's not really the very essence or what our bodies are made out. And I also was very curious about, as a performer, as a dance maker, and as an artist, I was very curious about how in this form of thought, only animals and humans have bodies. Sometimes we talk about bodies of water, no? If we talk about lakes and rivers, they can have bodies. But mountains as bodies, or I don't know, forests and lakes, in a way are perceived as nature or natural resource. And natural resource is already a key for extracting, right? Because it's a resource, it's something I can take. It's not something that has a life on its own, and maybe a body, an organism, an environment, an ecology. And through making this work, I got very interested in the notion, it comes from biology, holobiont, which is a host, like in the case of the Maceual in Mexico, a mountain, which hosts many other beings. And it is one, let's say we can say it is this particular mountain, but it's also made of all these other relations of people, animals, crops, And in a way, modern colonial form of thought somehow taught us at school, that we were individuals. But doing this research and also understanding this notion of holobiont, it happens that actually people are made of so many other beings, just like a mountain is, right? That create the environment and the capacity for that body to function, to feel, to think, If we talk about gut bacteria or the amount of viruses, that's very, at the moment, very a topic that our bodies carry. Actually, we are living ecosystems just like this mountain region, hosting other beings and being also emerging from those other beings. So in a way, I don't know if I answer your question, but from the performance and from the perspective of dance and embodied practices, I think that was my entry point to this very painful topic of extractivism, which I understood as a form of thinking that allows that to happen before economic and political reasons emerge. So just to finish, when a corporation is defending a project, is defending the possibility to extract a natural resource. When an indigenous group is defending that mountain, they are defending something else. It's not really natural resource. And when the ecologist or the Green Party is defending the ecology or the environment, those three things are very different, right? There are different concerns in that meeting around extractivist projects that I think is interesting to understand. What are these three things, and what are they used for and what do they mean?
it's very important that you raised those issues, what we are considering as bodies. Just coming 2 days ago from Crete, I've heard from their people their story about Crete mountains that are keeping the stability of the island. When the underground volcano of Santorini and so on, their mountains, which they respect very much, are keeping Crete somehow solidly not disturbed. And that was something really, how I'd say, that we could appreciate how they respect their nature, those mountains, seeing in them part, not only as a resource, although it's their water resource, and that's a lot of other resources coming, but something that is part of their dialogue. And this is also something that you yesterday introduced partially, is what we call today in theory subaltern knowledge, that is usually absolutely neglected by Western knowledge, but especially by corporations that are coming, conquering, exploiting, and so on. The knowledge of indigenous communities is not considered as equal, as relevant, as something, and it is very important that artists of today are giving the voice to indigenous communities as collectives, as individuals also, to tell the stories of their communities, not only personal stories, although this is important. And one more thing to link to our yesterday book promotion of Patrice Pavis' dictionary of performance is the word glocalization, because that's really what is happening in today's world. Our locality is conquered by global processes. So thank you very much for raising all those important issues in your performances, but also in your theoretical explorations and work, because that's something that is incredibly important. In fact, when Jérôme Bell, a few years ago, decided to respond to all these issues that are present regarding to global warming, climate change, and so on, by renouncing to travel. Of course, he belongs to the very small, very elite and specific privileged group of people that I also consider myself to belong. I'm doing commissioned research, as he is doing commissioned art projects. We are not part of the world that is doing something on their own, alone, isolated in Indian theaters, Mexican theaters, Chilean, and then try to raise attention of the big world to those events. So it is easy for those like Jérôme Bell to stop traveling and to use all these extremely well-developed technological resources to create, to choreograph, to work with others throughout the world. However, this is not the case. My friends, for example, from Indian Theatre Forum Network, Katkata Theatre, for example, they live out of mobility in Europe and in the world. They travel and give their performances for 3-4 months, and they can survive lack of public policies in their countries and produce new shows for the next season. So I would really like to ask Lazaro Gabino Rodrigez why he found this letter of Jérôme Bell so inspiring to make a clear response from the southern perspective, from the artist coming from not that fortunate world with a huge financial and moral and all other educational support that is, for example, offered to arts by French government, and how Later on, since this letter was written as a response, he continued working and developing his artistic reflection and reflection regarding all these issues, ecological issues, but also responsibility of individual artists and artistic collective to raise awareness and to help in, let's say, developing of citizens' activism and imagination.
Uno, dos, tres. It's working? Ah, okay, perfect. Thank you, Milena, and Amanda, and Karlota for being in the table, and thanks for having me. I will not answer the question now because I want to tackle this thing in a, let's say, broader perspective. I am I think the issue of the Jerome Bell stuff, I think it's a part of a problem, but it's quite obvious, like the perspective and so on. But I think there's more interesting problems to talk about first, so I will talk about something else in the beginning. I'm an artist, and I'm talking about from the perspective of an artist, and what I'm concerned, let's say, it's about the questions that, the old ones and the basic ones and the more obvious one. It's what I'm doing, how I'm doing what I'm doing, how what I'm doing it's in relation with the world I'm living in. That are the questions that I'm dealing with, and somehow maybe this, what I'm gonna say is pretty obvious, but I will say it anyway. So. In fact, I just want to say one clarification that it's also for me quite interesting all the time that we speak about colonization and decolonization, and this happens, for example, in English, that it's not the mother language of any of us and so on, and of course it's pretty obvious why we're doing it, but it's always good to think about it. And now that Milena was speaking about how academy, the relation of academy with, let's say, the colonization thinking, or these new departments in universities and so on, and the critique that many people have been doing, like Silvia Rivera Cusicanqui, about how the decolonization program, let's say, has opened the academies of the Global South to thinkers of the Global North more than the other way around. So it's still like a very complicated relation what we have with these issues and how we tackle it and how we reinforce one situation with our actions. What I want to talk about now, it's about something that I'm interested, that is that there is no correlation between what we thought as a positive action in ecology, let's say an ecological positive action, and what we think as a positive action for people or social justice standard. That somehow there is not a simple correspondence between these two concerns that we have as society, and that those different struggles don't fit very well together, let's say. And what I want to address is the need to embrace those tensions that arise from that situations. And of course that there's no simple answers to these questions. I was reading some weeks ago, the 13th of August was the 500th anniversary of the fall of the city of Tenochtitlan. That was, let's say, like the biggest empire in the territory that now is Mexico. If I'm not making some sense, please tell me. My English is not, so I'm not so, please do it. Okay, so was the 500th anniversary of the falling of the city. And there was a lot of debates about what is the situation now, how to reflect in the past, and so on and so on. And there was this publication of a woman called Audra Mitchell that was called Decolonizing the Anthropocene, that I was quite interested because she was saying this idea that during the period after the conquer of America, let's say in the first century of the colony, she said, I don't know how she arrived to these numbers, but that 61 million people that was the population of the continent, they in the next century, 54 million people died by plague, by murder, by whatever, by labor force, by whatever. But it was like a huge amount of people that, well, that's not the surprise, but what the article addresses was that in the glaciers of the Antarctica, you can see the diminution of the CO2, like in the lowest point of the prior 2,000 years. So there, what she was trying to say, that was this really clear ecological impact of what happened in the colony with the diminishing of the population. And of course, she was not trying to say that that is the solution for now. But what I was thinking very like, wow, is that something that we consider, of course, like a genocide and something that is completely wrong, has, let's say, this kind of positive ecological impact. In the other way around, I was reading this book of Mignolo and this woman, Catherine Walsh. It's a book called On the Coloniality, and I was very impressed by a paragraph where they speak about the Anthropocene, and it's a paragraph that they just said like the Anthropocene is just like a fiction, like a neo-colonial way of of rebuild a narrative with a very modernism perspective. And I was very also shocked because somehow, as far as I understand the Anthropocene as this situation of how humanity or humankind became a geological force and how our actions today has changed the period of time of the consequence, now is not like only a biographical time or a generational time. So like we enter this moment where the consequence of the human acts are projected further, let's say. Like I was a bit shocked how they just take out the Anthropocene, or I don't know how to get rid of it so easily. There are many examples, of course, and we like the quinoa in Peru and in Bolivia, and how the raising of the raising of the demand of quinoa has made a very concrete situation with the farmers in those countries, and also many things. What I want to say is quite simple, but is that there are not a correspondence in these two struggles, like the decolonial struggle and the ecological struggles, and how we are going to rebuild a world that needs not only those two, but many struggles to be articulated in concrete actions. In my field, that is the theater, let's say, I don't consider the theater an ecological problem at all. I don't think that the theater is something that needs to be regulated because we are affecting something. So I'm not an ecologist, but that's what I think for what I read and so on. But what I think it's important is to consider theater as a way to take it very serious, theater as a way that humankind, es humanidad, humankind portrays itself. In Oedipus, like the tragedy of Sophocles, that starts with this peste, with this, plague, with this plague. And I was very interested, now that we're in a sort of plague, how in this theater piece the plague is portrayed, and how all the agency is in the body of these men. These men can stop the plague with his actions. And I think there's something about how we are gonna reflect on what we are living now, that theater can really contribute. There's of course all these ideas in academy about I don't know, is the correct translation, but post-humanist thinking, or how we reframe humanism and how a new humanism can be built, let's say, considering the different actors and the different forces and the different ecosystems and the different relation that humans establish. So what I was thinking is how theater can embrace this responsibility of portray a new way of being of the humans on the world somehow. That makes sense somehow? Yeah, that's it.
Amanda, please, I see you are eager to respond, Lazaro.
No, I thought it's two things that I wanted to clarify what Lazaro was speaking. At the moment of the Holocaust in the Americas, temperature lowers because the population goes so low that it becomes cold, right? So in a way, the issue of 2 degrees increase in temperature and population are very related. And then we can have thoughts about, COVID, what it creates, and which other modes of getting rid of us will the Earth find in the future. Because it seems that getting rid of us is a way of lowering the temperature. Yeah. And the other thing is, in relation to the Anthropocene, what I wanted to say is like decolonizing the Anthropocene has to do with thinking that it's not the anthropos in general, that is a very colonial perspective, like the human, at the center. Which human? Which kind of human? Because we know many humans who didn't at all contribute to the situation, to the environmental crisis we are living today, who have been living in sustainable ecologies for 10,000 years, like in the highlands of Puebla, Mexico, or in the Andes. So which kind of human is this human of the Anthropocene? And that's where the decolonial critique comes in. It's not the human in general. So there is, again, this mode of thought that becomes apparently universal, but is local, right? Which is the colonial perspective. The modern colonial perspective who thinks, that it is universal and is actually local. Those things I wanted to clarify.
Thank you very much. In fact, Lazaro also started with mentioned social justice, and here we come to public policies, I would say, that are mostly or should be responsible to reflect on social justice in every respect: ecological, political, social, educational, and so on. But here are we today to debate about ecological issues. Of course, there is issue of social ecology, which is everything is interrelated, as we could see. Coloniality, migrations, climate change, and so on. So I would really like to know to what extent European Green Foundation, but also Green Party in EU, are aware of their wider responsibilities, of course, European, but not only European, because what Europe does reflects throughout the world. What European companies does reflect, yes, pooling resources, but not only that. You mentioned how, in fact, destruction of people had effects. I remember the war in Yugoslavia, when it's living near Sava River. In 80s, we used to wash our children after swimming in Sava River. Already in 92, only 2 years after the war started, embargo closed all factories, Sava River became clean, the nature restored, fish came back, planktons and so on. So even the disastrous moment might have some positive elements. But here we are more about speaking about public responsibility and how public structures are seeing and to what extent foundations are developing advocacy arguments in relation to European politics in politicians to help in spreading knowledge, spreading concerns that are relevant today.
Thank you. Yeah, thanks for having me. Well, it's difficult, difficult topic, and well, I don't want to speak on behalf of well, all Greens in Europe. No, I think that the public awareness is too little, and I think the role of well, not only foundations but NGOs and policymakers is to connect also the issues and to increase the awareness. Especially when we talk about, and I mean, this is what I know a bit about, is climate change and migration and the interplay of those two, which are both, I would say, key topics for the Greens, and at the same time, they're very politicized. So it's, and maybe to say, and yeah, it's a sad story, but it's very difficult to have those conversations, and I think the political climate in Europe is very difficult to have a nuanced debate about migration and how climate change relates to that, and what the responsibilities are. And I think that the discussion that or what public policies we're having, I mean, when we talk about climate change and migration, and linking back to the name of this panel, we have an absolute white discourse. So the frameworks, the policies that we have are created by white people, by the global north, and they also cater to the needs of the global north. So in that sense, I would say, yeah, it's really not that the people that are really affected are having a seat at the table. So I think yeah, I mean, maybe to say on climate migration specifically, I mean, there is no climate refugees, there is no legal category. There is then also no international protection. There are no frameworks. And this, of course, also links to the fact that we don't really see that in Europe because it's not affecting people in Europe. So in that sense, it's really difficult, and it's also a difficult topic because I mean, I prefer the terminology environmental mobility because we're talking about human mobility and it's a continuum. So it can, you know, relate to many different things. Of course, when we think about a climate refugee, we might think of someone who's displaced because of a natural disaster, which is a very clear, you know, sudden onset event. But when we, for instance, talk about, you know, economic migrants in Europe, as we like to do a lot, then, you know, for a lot of people, their economy and their livelihood depends on the environment. And they might not call themselves an environmental migrant, but I think a lot of people are driven by that. So, I mean, from a European perspective, and I think, well, Greens, I don't want to talk on their behalf, but have been trying to push for, you know, a discussion on migration policies, but, well, since 2015, it's impossible. It's impossible to have a discussion, and I know from policymakers that since 2015 they are unable to foster real change and, you know, talk about different forms of migration, and they're so busy trying to stop it from the policies from worsening that there's no way of, you know, thinking of a way to actually really have a
something
discussion.
more substantial, in fact. Because this summer I was going to Mali to give some lectures in Africa, in Bamako. And I was a little bit worried checking on internet. It was a rainy season, says on internet. So I came to Mali, it was terribly hot and dry. So I asked, like, isn't that rainy season? And they look at me saying, we haven't had a rain for 5 years. And then you understand a little bit more and easier what does it mean war that we always described as tribal wars in Mali, which are in fact climate wars around water, because there is no Dogon and Fulani tribes. Maybe you have read now in newspapers, it was for a few days it was an issue, and then people forgot. News are going, disasters are going. But that's basically Dogon are agricultural tribe. They are near the river, and Fulani they are having their cattle, but there is no more sources and rivers on their mountains, so they have to come back to the river Niger and to destroy the crops of the Dogon. And that's how the war started. So what's the war? Is it really tribal war? No, it's a war for water. It's the war around as a consequence of climate change. And when we see Mediterranean as a sea of dead people, of a lot of boats, we say like, oh, those Africans, they come as economic migrants wanting to profit of our public welfare. But in fact, that's not the case. They are probably now coming to a better region to survive, but it's a more question of survival.
I would like to add something. Oh, this one, yes. I would like to add something to your, because when you are saying that there is no legal framework for a climate refugee, there is also no legal framework for ecocidal behavior for big enterprises. So I think those two voids in the law are very related. And then when we talk about climate change, somehow it's so nice, no? It's like the weather is changing. But climate change is totally related to extractivism, and is totally related to the mega extractive corporate transnational industry. And it's very related to that. It's very related to the big money of ecocidal, which somehow is created through ecocidal behavior and the destruction and the de-earthing of the communities. Hi. So that is
the troop is passing by.
So those two legal voids are so related. And then when we say climate change, it sounds like, oh, the climate got crazy, but it's totally based on a concept of growth which is not sustainable, or a concept of economy that I really wonder what is climate economy? What could be a framework for an economy to work which would not be anymore founded or based on growth and based on the automatization of the market, because it's basically, you know, the stock exchange is is something that is non-human anymore. It's based on artificial intelligence. It does it by itself. It's like a Pandora box. We don't know what happens there. So I think those are very related. And then the issue of migration in Europe, I understand if it's not possible to go forward because we are actually going backwards in the thought of how to relate with the currents of migration. But I think from an artistic perspective, I would like to say that in some way, all goes back to a form of thinking that we have inherited, which somehow makes nature something that is there, the environment or climate is something that is not related to human action, that is not social. And there I think it's so interesting to learn from Amazonian communities who extend social relations to animals, plants, rivers, and they have social relations that are not only among humans. I think that is the future if we want to think about ways of dealing with the crisis.
I wanted to maybe add something on, the general also, the discussion that we're having about migration is a weird one to begin with, because it's based on our sedentary bias as well. So we're completely seeing migration as an abnormal behavior, and we're normalizing immobility. We're also, and this is a European or maybe a discourse of the global north, is this narrative of, and it's actually used, in favor of arguing for climate action. If we don't act now, then millions of people will come, or millions more, whereas it's evident that migration, displacement related to climate change is already taking place, and most people move within borders or within the region, and this is really also important. The people that are impacted, oftentimes they're already the most vulnerable, and they're actually getting stuck because of climate change. So immobility is actually a big problem, and we're not seeing that. We're seeing the people that are able to migrate, that have resources. We're not really talking about those who can't, who fail to do so, or the ones who simply don't want to. This is also, a very white and Western discourse to say, well, everyone wants to come here because it's so great here. But, people have also, their communities, and and so this is just what I wanted to add, that it's really, and there, I'm dreaming that at some point we will have this nuanced discussion, I think, on migration, but that's just what I want to add.
To come back to one concept that raised from all three of your discussion, it's degrowth. That's something that is linked to my profession, because I was also always teaching cultural management, saying that the biggest difference from business management is that we in cultural management, we do not aspire to grow, to intensify, to make more and more and more, and so on. And that's somehow plus embodied in this culture. I remember in 60s when I was in primary school that our teacher was telling us what was official politics of the day, how retrograde our peasants are, that they don't want to make plantations, that they don't want to make intensive agriculture. They do all extensive agriculture, meaning 2 goats, 1 sheep, and so on, 1 peach tree, 1 this tree, apple tree, and so on. So when United Nations FAO program gave a big present to one Serbian village, Jarmenovci, in 50s, to show on one example how the village should grow, there was no enough rural people, villagers, that would accept, so they couldn't give for free 30,000 of cherry trees, because people didn't understand the concept of plantation. They would say, but I have 2 cherry trees. Why I would need 100 of cherry trees? What I'm going to do with them? So still today, you might see in between 2 cities, Topola and Jarmenovci, through next to the road, planted those cherry trees because they just couldn't throw them away. But that is something, in fact, this concept of plantations, especially in Amazonia, in Argentina, and so on, that is completely destroying ecologically the structure, and it's destroying sustainability of this growth policy.
That you could actually call plantation scene instead of Anthropocene, right? That it could be called the plantation scene.
As a geographical, topo-sociological, let's say, we are not important that much.
No, in general, I think the whole industrial revolution, is powered by the workforce of the colonized, the racialized, and those that kind of give the possibility for this technological revolution to exist, to happen, and based on the concept of plantation. So some people argue that the Anthropocene should be called plantation scene. That's what I wanted to say.
Okay, I would like now to go in another round of discussion to raise the issue of solidarity in between theater practitioners, civil society activists from both global north, global south, but also in between global south, artistic practitioners, cultural workers, artists, and so on. And I will like to quote Milo Rau, who unfortunately we planned to have today with us, but he couldn't come. And he said, working globally means creating networks of theoretical debates and practical solidarity that are not foreseen in the current system, but artists are creating those. And I think this debate is part of this effort to create kind of a platform for reflection, but also of reflecting on solidarity, I think is something extremely important. Not only as they put it in this Ghent manifesto, that in each performance you have to have some people that are not artists themselves, that you have to raise the issue, that you have to travel, to give outside of Europe. I mean, they put very many ethically relevant issues for theater world, but I think that probably now we can reflect for you personally, for you as a civil activist, for you as an artist, what does it mean, the word solidarity, how you experience that, or how you want to show your empathy or your energy toward others less privileged, because anyway, we are here more or less part of the privileged society.
Well, in my case, I am based in Vienna, and I am supported by the city of Vienna, which is already a very privileged situation. In Mexico, there was a great cultural fund that is now in the process of being dismantled, but that also allowed artists to, have a base support to develop their work. And in the case of my work, I think of that support and that possibility as a potential to establish networks of solidarity, as you say, that reach really far sometimes, depending on the project, and that really can contribute to the economies of people that are living in totally other contexts, like the people that I work with in the piece in the volume 4, which is Danza y Frontera, who live in a stripe of borderlands between Mexico and the US, which is precarized as borderlands used to be for cheap labor industry and the drug trafficking between the state and Mexico. I like to imagine that privilege can, is like the tentacles of an octopus that go very far, or like a nervous system that can reach to somehow allow people that are very far from, I don't know, Vienna, to be part of a discourse, to be part of a context, of a world-making context, because the theater, I think, is a world-making practice. in which people meet that would not meet other way, and get to discuss and get to share perspectives that would not happen without the artistic proposition and the cultural somehow different supports that allow that to happen. And this is very rich for me, it's very precious. And when Gabino answered to this Jerome Bell letter, I have the feeling, I felt the same. I felt how much do, you know, the cultural sector has to become guilt. Guilt is a Judeo-Christian, you know, context about mobility, when that mobility foster transcultural encounters which can really allow different perspectives to meet and different worlds to talk, no? and to get to know each other. So in that sense, I think that is a very hypocritical point. I think we really should be like demanding the authorities to lower emissions, and also to think about green energy, renewal energy, which is not renewal and it's not green. Because as here, I heard, I don't know if it's true, there are some lithium, you will have some lithium problems in the future, we already have them. Those batteries, you know, are made of the displacement of the people and the communities at the sites of the extraction. They are made of blood, like everything we consume, it is, you know, no one of us can live an ethical life, and that is a fact. We are trapped in this, and it's painful, but it's true. So in a way, I think that it's an hypocrisy to put on the artistic sector, the cultural sector, which is a sector that already in neoliberal frames is very defund and somehow made very precarious. Worldwide, yeah. Of course, if we talk about Zurich, okay, or Paris, okay, don't go, don't travel, you can afford it. And maybe your perspective is also not so needed.
Yeah, what I find difficult is like to set an ethical standard from a particular perspective, and of course from a privileged perspective. And about solidarity, I think, well, we lost this word in Spanish, at least in Mexico, because one president made a campaign like during his 6-year period that was called solidarity. And the thing was that Mexicans need to be solidary with each other and so on. So it's a word that we don't have anymore, and we always like related, or I related with this idea of personal struggle life. If you are solidar to him or to her, you will be fine. Like this idea of to put the systemic on the individual, let's say, responsibility. And I think that's how I don't have the idea of solidarity as like a value, but I have more the idea, let's say, maybe because, yeah, somehow, I don't know if in all Latin America, but in many countries of Latin America, there's more this idea of interdependence, that you cannot do things by your own because how the world is, the policies are done, the policies are fixed. So it's a sort of forced solidarity, like a system.
So it's more sharing and...
But not sharing with this idea of, let's say, of making good. Is you need to share because you need to share and there's no other way somehow. So there's not this idea of positive idea of I have mine and I share with you and then we have something that it's ours. It's just that it is what it is. So I'm a bit always skeptical of these ideas of how if I don't take airplanes, I'm contributing to lower. If I give €1 to the person that is beggar, I am contribute to reduce inequality or redistribution of wellness. So I think we need to not to move forward, but to move away from this idea of how our personal actions, how we consider our personal actions. And that's what I'm trying to explain about Oedipus some minutes ago. This idea of to rethink of the importance of the individual action and to reframe it in a different context. and how theater can allow us to understand that perspective, the perspective not to banish the individual, but to banish the concept that we are, the concept, yeah.
Okay, it's very difficult, and in different languages we are facing this problem with the same words that might be misused, like the word leader in Germany, which was used for Hitler. And today no one would say in German for someone he is Kulturführer. It would look very strange. Same in Serbia, by the way, we don't say vođa, because we had one writer, Radoje Domanović, who really described what does it mean, leader, in our vocabulary. So we use English word leader as a neutral, not our own. So, but this is something that you mentioned I would really like to contend. It's simplifying and making solidarity linking to charity. No, these are two different things, giving charity to a beggar, and solidarity means feeling your part of responsibility for your profession, for example. Solidarity with other theaters in less privileged region. Solidarity with precarious, you might be even super employed in National Theatre, for example, in Belgrade, but do you feel solidarity with your colleagues of acting or directing, for example, branch and so on? And in more wider sense, when I speak with the solidarity, can we feel solidarity with the people that are now really suppressed and repressed by coloniality, different forms of coloniality, migrations? That's, for example, what Milo Rau is doing with his performances, feeling responsible to be solidarity with people that live, for example, in cultures without any cultural infrastructure. That's something that in Europe, but even in Latin America, is hard to imagine that might exist a country when there is no theater buildings, when there is no concert halls, public system, cultural policies, and so on. So he deliberately make his solidarity action with those areas of the world.
Interesting, sorry. I totally get it, and I'm not trying to say like solidarity it's equal from charity. I'm just trying to pass from solidarity and how we lose that word from this idea of individual change. But this is also how, when you go to Afghanistan and you said, I'm gonna put here my theater piece, well, we can think about what kind of solidarity is really Mr. Rao taking with the people there. I'm not sure that it's well, how many people get let's say, profit from that action? Where is those people profit? Where is Milo Rao now? Where is the Afghan institutions now? I think we need to, because I think this is also part of an individual idea, of an individual behavior. And that's what I want to question, the individual alcance, the individual
outreach.
Yeah, outreach of our behavior, and to try to be, I don't know, to be humble with the idea of individuality. I don't know.
This is super important, and this is, I think, something we can totally learn from indigenous communities in Mesoamerica and in the south of America. This idea of individuality doesn't exist as it is in the what Mignolo calls the colonial matrix of power. It doesn't exist like that, and culture probably doesn't happen in theaters, and that is culture as well. Culture maybe doesn't happen in the same ways, it doesn't have those kind of standards, but it's culture as well. And that is, I think the colonial violence happens when you cannot see the other, when you cannot see other models of thought, other frames of world making, other forms of organization. And maybe in coming back to, to nature and the commons, maybe you cannot see the uncommons. You cannot see that for the Quechua-speaking people, that mountain is not a mountain, not geology, but is a person. And why not that relation with the person mountain could exist if the person Gabino is made out of so many other beings inside, which constitute him, just like a mountain is people, crops, water, and animals that create this wholeness, this holobiont. So solidarity, it's rooted in this idea that, you know, it happens only between people because only people have social systems that are only for humans, right? And interdependence has this outreach that we are in interdependence with certain vegetation here and with, you know, certain waves of oxygen that are reaching us, or air, or some kind of wind that allows us to exist, and water, and the food, the market, the supplies, other people, their bacteria and viruses. So I think it's a beautiful shift, no, to make this felt experience of interdependence a possibility of the future of solidarity. But coming back to Milo Rao's action, culture is also extractivist. Theater is also extractivist. You can extract the pain of others and make a great production and have a lot of success with that. And that I just want to acknowledge that, because I asked a lot myself when I did this piece, which is personal, in which way I could there portray my mother and her struggles against this mega mining company without harming myself or extracting that, you know, in relation to, with which sensitivity one can do that, which are the perspectives that we have to share and care in order to create a project, which somehow is also a capital. If it's not really an economical capital, it is for sure a capital of meaning, of sensing, of thinking, of sharing, right? Cultural capital.
Karlota, you have anything, or we ask, you might add something, or we ask? I think we can ask. Okay, I think it's a time for audience to interfere in this debate. Yes, please.
It's chilly. It's chilly. I'm getting like a cold. I'm getting my cold.
Is it working?
Yes, it's working
Okay.
now. Thank you. Amanda introduced us a feeling, which she brought from the indigenous communities of South Latin America, a feeling of interdependence, a sharing, caring relationship with the environment, which she called Ayu, right? I think this kind of feeling exists in all communities, actually, of the world, before being dominated by global capitalism, which enforces extractionism and seeing the nature only as an asset. Also, the European communities, European societies have these, originally has this feeling. In German, there's a beautiful word, Heimat. It actually is the same sentiment originally. That's why I think, and this sentiment is naturally being disturbed by an excessive migration, which is caused by the global capitalism. So this ontological framework, which gives us another feeling of interdependence, a caring relationship with the nature, could be a universal, could be a basis of a universal perspective. It's not about a local specific city, but it's a basis of
widespread.
yes, it's a basis of universal perspective, I believe.
Thank you. Can you give the microphone to her? Okay. Come sit here.
Thanks. I have a comment on the debate on solidarity because Lazaro, you mentioned in the first part of your talk that the question for you is the problem is that there is no correspondence between struggles for ecology and struggles for social justice, decoloniality, that links need to be created between these struggles. And I think that actually solidarity is one part of the answer to this problem, because solidarity is not just about solidarity between individual people, it is also about solidarity between movements. Like you, Milena, said, it is the feeling of responsibility that we have as part of one movement, as part of one struggle to support other struggles and to actually create something joint, a collective struggle. So I do think that we need to reflect on interdependencies of all kinds, but not to neglect solidarity. Okay.
It's beautiful. May I react? Are you?
You.
Just shortly. It's beautiful because actually I believe that the theater of the future in places that are places of extraction, it is only a theater that is made out of solidarity with the different struggles that arise in those places.
Maybe you are totally right. I just think, or what I want to say, that I'm struggling to make it clear even for me, because it's something that I'm thinking, is that sometimes I have the feeling that we conceive that the idea that making good is, let's say, making good, like in general. But I think there's sometimes that something that looks good, it's what I'm trying to say. For example, if people stops eating red meat, that it's something that is good because it's an ecological disaster, and people moves to quinoa, that also have some consequences. So that's it's so basic, but it's what I want to think, that it's not about to go within one struggle, it's just like something that goes faster, that goes, well, whatever, that thing. And I know I'm not answering you, but I'm trying just to elaborate on that. There was this thing in a hometown where my grandmother is, and how let's say the ampliation of the middle class and the tourism, because, well, there's something about how the global tourism, that it is an ecological problem, not theater, but global tourism, it is an ecological problem, how it was, let's say, a result of the ampliation of the possibilities of some people, let's say. So there was some sort, or at least as I can see it, some sort of justice in the idea that people can have the means to travel to other places, to see different realities and so on. But also how this became a problem. That makes sense or no? Yeah, somehow, yeah.
Okay, thank you.
Okay.
Hola, hi, thanks everyone really for amazing talks. Unfortunately, I haven't been able to see your pieces, so otherwise I would have had more questions, but I guess mainly for Lazaro and Amanda, but also Karlota, I guess, yeah, the question of solidarity the other way around as well, like what is from your experience maybe, what can your activity, cultural activity, cultural work, what do you think it can do actually, you know, to the frontline communities and those areas, or we could call them, you know, most affected peoples and areas. What you do, you know, bring back, you know, simply put, in a way. I mean, you've raised it now, Amanda, but, you know, so as we refrain as cultural producers from extracting more, and I totally agree with your analysis, this is crucial to address, that actually cultural practices, as you also pointed out, academic and artistic practices are based on extractivismo, like fundamentally, like in a Western kind of colonial mode. So if we refrain from doing that, I think that's kind of crucial. But what can they actually, can they effectively, materially also redistribute and repair and heal? And yeah, what's your experience around this? I know this is really a tough one, and you know, you don't need to kind of, you know.
I think that we are, you know, climate change is like a threshold, and we are gonna see in which way our cultural field will somehow transform also and pass through this threshold and maybe start to do much more things in relation to local communities without losing, you know, a sort of what you called universal perspective. I'm a bit suspicious about that, but yes. I wonder, like, I have some visions that are not realities yet, but I wonder, like, in which way a series of walks, for example, in the places of extraction that I mentioned in my piece, and I work with a series of walks there around this mining place in 2023 could be forms of schooling or deschooling or relation to that territory, for example. I imagine that activism and art and feminist struggles are going to go hand in hand, and they are going to be somehow, art is going to be much less centered in itself, like in the I don't say 90s or so, which was much more about craft and, you know, the sort of the conceptual. And I think we are going into a moment where art somehow it's opening up, and I think that is a very beautiful moment and a very important moment. I don't know in which way practical this can happen, but what I see from my perspective of, you know, dealing with decolonial thought is that the theater, the museum, the university as places that have been part of the pedagogy of coloniality are places which are delocalized. You see, the theater is like abstracted. It has no roots. It's nowhere. It could be everywhere. It could be here, this room, this dark room, and it could be in other many cities. The museum, the same, is wide, but the wideness of its walls are like invisible. You don't see that actually it's wide and why it's not other color, you know what I mean? So those frames are frames that abstract, that sort of have no place. And I probably have the intuition that we are going to go into the notion of place. And that is something that I totally celebrate. And it has the dangers of, you know, closing on itself, total hyper-locality, which I don't think is the way to go. As we are looking in Europe in like right-wing movements that are enclosing. I don't think that is the way to go. But I celebrate the idea of, you know, decolonizing those institutions so that they can really land on earth, on relations, on the places and the communities that are engaged with. I don't know if it answers more.
I just want to say something that is somehow how our company works, and this is how we arrive, and I'm not promoting this mode, but we separate very clear our, let's say, artistic practice that deals more with things that we don't know, with things that we want to explore, with things that we doubt about it, from the practice that we have, let's say, related to organization and activism, let's say. Because for us, let's say, there's these two different strategies. And activism, well, in my experience, it's really rooted on effectiveness. Like how we do the most effective to achieve this situation. And art, somehow we consider it the other way around. So for us, it's very important to have this idea. And also in the art, I like, let's say, or we like to, or it's important for us to present ourselves, our point of view of something. That's somehow what we want to share. And in the activism, there are people that have been working in different struggles for so many years that I think my mission, or my, not mission, I don't know, my contribution is more to make this invisible work, let's say this invisible, that all organizations needs people, needs whatever. So it's somehow that how we deal with this situation.
Is there any more questions in?
Yeah, I have one. I guess it's not a simple question, but a short one. So first, thank you for this conversation. And my question is, how do we address this, let's say, narrative where in developing world, in developing countries, you are now being, they are being told, and people there are being told that, well, now you cannot use your resources because of the climate change, while their resources have been exploited for many, many years in the past, before. So, yeah, that was my question.
I didn't understand because nobody is told you can't use the resources because they disappear. For example, there is no water. So nobody tell you don't use water. There is no water.
Okay, but there's I guess there's still some resources.
Coal mining.
For example, I'll give you an easy example in Serbia. So Bor region is the biggest coal and copper mining region in Serbia, and it has been exploited by many different empires through Serbia's history, which Serbia was under. And now, when we've came on our own and we're our own nation in the last, let's say, past century, now we've come to the point where not that we are being told, maybe that was a bit too harsh.
But we sold it out.
Yes, we sold it. So, but now we have this other resource that we want to use because we now want money. We now want to use our resources, but now we are coming to this point where we now cannot. Of course, not all of us, but there's a big portion that really does want to use it. So that was my question. I hope I was clear.
I don't know how to answer that question. I can just share my experience. In Chile, our natural resources are extracted by transnational companies based in London. So very little of that contributes to jobs, local jobs that then disappear because at a certain moment, the place is totally polluted and the mining company will have to close. And what is left behind is chronic illness and sacrifice zone is called. I don't know, nobody told us not to do it. We don't have the capacity to do it. Also geopolitically, we have been placed in this experiment of neoliberalism exactly to fed the extractive the extractive capital of the global north. And my question and my provocation there is, in which way in the future Central Europe, for example, could fund cultural projects that happen at the sites of extraction and not in cultural institutions in Europe?
They will do it. They will do it because it's a trendy and fashionable. But I'm just going to remind you that our president said, why you are complaining? You wanted working places. And Chinese came here because they could not do polluted industry anymore in China, so they came here. But do you want job or you don't want jobs? And he said that you can find on YouTube. So it is the question. I mean, really, and I think our role is mostly to raise questions through theater, through activism, because we obviously we cannot fight direct political games. We just heard in the previous debates that some selling out water supply started even with previous governments. So obviously politicians have very concrete agendas. Let's sell what I can sell when I am on the power. They don't think longer than their 4 years of mandate election period. So it is about us and our activism. That's I don't, okay, maybe you have more precise advice.
No, I mean, I wish I had. No, I just wanted to add, and I mean, it for me also links back to what you said earlier about, you know, the individual and the individual responsibility. And I think when we talk about, you know, our system and our economy and climate change, it's this is the typical narrative that is being sold to us, is that it's your individual responsibility. And, you know, that it's then, okay, let's focus on countries in the global south or whatever, that, or China, you know, that want to like catch up, and they also use the same logic. But it's our logic, and it's kind of trying to distract from, as you said, the multinational companies that are still, you know, having getting the capital out of it. So,
okay. The last question from Yanis. I think we should a little bit close it.
Yes.
We have time, okay?
Maybe just a little bit another perspective on this general topic when related to question of solidarity and exploitation of people by people, yeah? I give an example from the country I come from, Slovenia. So there will be a big construction of new railway from the port of Koper inland, financed also by Hungarian investors. And the company that is going to construct is based in Turkey. They won the competition, and they will bring, or they're already bringing, workers from Turkey or wherever they will bring them from. And as soon as this became a news, the big discussion started: where are these workers going to be stationed? Yeah? And the entire story was to isolate them as much as possible. We don't want to have anything with them. This was kind of a narrative that was going on, as if kind of natural catastrophe or another kind of danger is actually coming. On the same moment, there were very little voices about in what kind of conditions these people will live and work. And the mayor of the location where they will be stationed at the end was saying that they will go directly from the place where they will be stationed to the place where they will work and back. And they will not move around freely. They will be there and they will work, I don't know how many hours and how many days. So, and this was promoted as a positive news. They will be just there. And when we think about the question of solidarity, there was very little voices about exploitation, that this is actually kind of slavery, and so on and so forth. So there was very little empathy for the situation in which people next door, like next to you, will actually live their life. Yeah? And I think when, and that's why I like and I have appreciation for everything that you will be saying. At the end of the day, there is always economy, there is always someone will make profit out of a certain gesture. And maybe to open the road for the next discussions, I think we should always look also when we have like a positive intentions and we have also projects that show great empathy and so on, we should always look what is the economy behind and who is actually going to profit at the end, even of some emotional work.
Thank you very much. We had that in Serbia too. Indian workers had even made strike, but there was no Serbian trade unions that tried to help them, to join them in solidarity effort and so on. It's really issue that we are ignoring, life of Chinese workers here, Bangladesh, Indian that are building these railways, because exactly they are situated deliberately outside of urban areas, so we don't see them in our normal lives, and then we do not care. Any more comments or issues? If not, I would like to conclude with something that I just now remembered, and that is the fact to what extent this festival as such has been since my youth a platform to offer us experiences with the world, and even with the companies that very often here were critical. So the leaders of the festival has been brave to invite Chicano, for example, company, to invite one Mexican company that I don't remember the name, but what I have learned from them in '73 was, I was a student troop manager taking care of them, and they asked me to bring them in Belgrade favela. I was 18 in that time, and I looked at them, Belgrade do not have favela. We are a socialist city. And they said it's impossible. There is no big city in the world without favelas. So I put to them the big map of Belgrade so that they can choose where they want to go, and I will drive them. And they selected 2 areas of the city, which really has been what we call Kaluđerica and Žarkovo. Žarkovo has urbanistic plan, but Kaluđerica was what we call wild settlement, I don't know, without urban planning. But then their point of view was, they've been absolutely shocked. So labor class is living in individual houses, and nomenclatura is living in New Belgrade apartments. How that is possible? All these houses are nice with garden, and so on. So that was the first time that I was starting to think about different ways, because why this phenomena was happening is again linked to solidarity. Labor class solidarity to build with all families their houses in the suburbs. So it was cheap, it was for 1 year, 2 year, 3 year to make a real house. While nomenclatura was sitting and waiting apartments for free, and then having some extra money to make their weekend houses. So it was not equal society, but it was not that unequal, because today you can find favelas on the outskirts of Belgrade, done and made in '90s or more recently by refugee community. But again, some lack of solidarity, we are ignoring that, and we don't want to see that and to embrace that. In this respect, I would like to finish it saying that what we have learned from different companies coming from to this festival from around the world, from theater of social intervention. And I remember end of '70s that critics were saying, but those are amateurs. They were using people, you know, like, and so on. Not, that's not really high level professional standards. But for those who wanted to be open and who were studying theater art and so on, it was really eye-opening that there are different methods of theater making that are more responsible, more, regarding public interest, more oriented to community, to people, and so on. So I would say that that BITEF, with Ivan Medenica as artistic director, is continuing this practice of bringing us voices that are coming from different sides of the world and that are not often heard, specifically now in Central Europe, that is overwhelmed with populism and money-making. Profit is now the king of all, rule of all rules. So I would like to thank you very much and to thank audience in this cold weather today to survive these 2 hours of debate. And if you have something to say, feel free to say.
Thank you very much, Milena. Thank you very much, the festival, and thank you for this nice debate. And I was very happy to share with you, even though it was chilly. Thank you very much.
Okay. Thank you.
Show you.